Hey everybody, and welcome to the penultimate instalment of my top 50 board games of all time for the 2021 into 2022 season. So we're really getting into the best of the best of the best now, from number 20 to number 11. So let's get started with number 20. So my 20th favourite game of all time is Teotihuacan Obelisk of the Sun. So this is actually a climber from last year, which came in at number 27, so not an insignificant climb. And this is a dice drafting game by Daniele Tascini, as you are trying to do lots of different things. But I suppose the thing that really makes this game different is the way you're drafting your dice in the first place, because you basically have this big obelisk in the centre of the table, and you've got a bunch of dice allocated to this different wheel in these different sections, and depending on the colour of those dice, it's going to depend whether that dice is tainted, neutral, or kind of in the light, basically. That might not be the right terminology, but you get the idea. And the idea is that when we're drafting these dice, we want to put them on our scale, and if those dice become quite imbalanced in terms of having too many dark dice in opposed to having a balanced thing, then you're actually going to suffer, or potentially suffer, negative points and suffer initiative in terms of going last in future rounds, which is a nice little decision that I'd love to see be used in more games. But the rest of this game really is a plethora of different mechanisms. Acquiring cards, but in order to acquire more cards, you need to climb up on a different track. Placing these pillars down on the board to claim different spots and get bonuses. Lining up these pillars and buildings so you get more and more scoring, which multiply on each other. You can even invest in this different spot on the board where if you draft dice from certain locations on the board or take certain actions, then you can actually get follow-up bonuses as well. So you can invest in things. All of this comes together so wonderfully. All the different sections on the board synergize with each other. And initially, despite me being a huge fan of Daniele Tascini games in general, this one was one I was thinking, this is good, but is it as good as the other ones? And the more I play it, the more I think the answer is certainly yes. This is tremendous. I love it. And every time I play it, I enjoy it more. So my number 20 is Teotihuacan Obelisk of the Sun. At number 19, I have a new entry with AquaSphere by Stefan Feld. So AquaSphere is a pretty weird game about programming, and I suppose you can call it an area majority style game or an area control style game, as you are basically going up this board using an engineer and collecting different actions along the way and pre-programming these little robots on your player board, which will show which actions you can take. And you're going to be using those actions to either fight off these weird little octopods, which will give you points. The more you kill them, the more points you get. You are going to be collecting these gems, which are going to get you points, but also when you score a certain amount of points, you're going to need to spend a gem because you get locked out of scoring any more points until you spend one. So I love that scoring mechanism. On top of all this, you want to be making sure that you have a presence on the board, because you'll get points that way in terms of controlling regions, but also you want to have stuff off your player board, because the more you have kind of unlocked on your player board, the more income you're going to take from round to round, which is really cool. And you're also incentivized to get things done early by placing these submarines, because the earlier the round, the more points you're going to get, a bit like Castles of Burgundy. And I think this game just is really unique. There's nothing else quite like it out there. I usually say that about most Stefan Feld games, but I think this is probably a prime example of that out of all of his designs. One of his most underrated gems. And I think this game is phenomenal. It's so much fun. It's pretty quick and easy to explain, but still has some really thought-provoking decisions. So love this one. That is AquaSphere at number 19. At number 18, I have last year's number 11 with Newton. So Newton is another engine building style game, as you are playing cards onto your player board, and these cards will have different actions assigned to them. But I love the way that if you play more symbols of these cards in a row, then they'll compound on one another. So you might play one travel card, and that'll let you move one space. Then you play the second travel card, it'll let you go 2 spaces. Then the third one, you go 3 spaces. And at the end of each round, out of the, I think it's 5 cards you've played, one of them gets retired and tucked under your player board, meaning that in future rounds you don't get the benefit from that card, but you do get the action ability in terms of making your matching actions stronger. So you do have to invest that way, deciding when is the time to retire this card and what strategy am I going to try and specialise in. The idea of the game is you're trying to travel around this map, collecting different information. You're also climbing these tech trees to get endgame scoring or unique bonuses. trying to get money and income, of course, and also trying to collect new cards so you can spend with them. But I love the scoring mechanism in this game, as you are trying to acquire these books and load your bookshelves up. And when you make these connections, either vertically or horizontally, you're going to start spinning and generating points each round. So do you want to go for those big bulk of empty shelves and get a load of points in a single turn, or do you want to go for the smaller ones early just to get things ticking along and get some points generating? So I love that idea. Another really good game that just is so harmonious with all the different ways the different parts of the game come together, and it's just an absolute blast to play. That is Newton at number 18. At number 17, I have another Stefan Feld game. This was last year's number 14, so a marginal fall, but nothing noticeable. That is Bonfire. So Bonfire is actually one of Feld's latest games. I think it came out last year. This one has a very weird out there theme, which I suppose isn't really relevant because most Stefan Feld games don't really make much sense. But this one, you are placing these action strips on your player board and you're trying to match up these symbols to get stronger versions of these actions. And these actions could be things such as travelling around this or sailing around this board, collecting these different objectives. And then the idea is you're trying to complete these objectives to get your points. These objectives have different colours on them. And you're trying to build this kind of road to move these spirits up, and the further you move these spirits up, you can potentially unlock more points. It has one of the most satisfying player boards you'll ever see, as everything just connects together well. If you line things up accordingly, you can get loads of points, but it really is a brain burner. You do have to pace yourself quite carefully in this one and not bite off more than you can chew. This game is a game that I'm terrible at. Every time I play it, I do awfully because I always go for too ambitious objectives, where I should be kind of setting my expectations a bit lower, or maybe striking a balance between going some easy objectives and some difficult ones. But it's a really interesting game about pacing yourself carefully, keeping things ticking along, and I just love the development of your player board and all the different point salad juiciness this game offers. So much fun. Again, weird, isn't the most intuitive at times, but the gameplay itself is just amazing fun. That is Bonfire at number 17. At number 16, I have a new entry with Keyflower. Now, Keyflower is a worker placement game, but with an economical edge to it, as you are trying to bid for these tiles in the centre of the board, and these tiles will all have different benefits on them, such as gaining resources or converting resources into other things. But you're doing that by placing meeples of certain colours, but each player is not assigned a specific colour. You can kind of have control of any colour meeple you want. You've got your blue ones, you've got your yellow ones, your red ones. But as soon as you bid a certain colour on one of these tiles, that colour or that tile is locked into that colour, so all the other players can only choose to outbid you with a matching meeple of that colour. So if you know that you have loads of blue meeples and you know that all the other players don't, then you can probably get a good bargain by doing that. But at the same time, you can choose to use tiles that you've previously acquired in previous rounds, or even use the meeples to use other people's tiles, but knowing that if you do that, you're going to have to sacrifice that meeple that they can potentially use against you in future rounds. So it does have this really dynamic flow of resources throughout the game, and knowing when to use things at the right time is important, because again, it can come back to bite you if you are too frivolous in terms of getting things or giving things to your opponent. Loads of different paths to victory here. It has a little spatial element of puzzle where you're trying to build your little your little city or your little town and map things out accordingly. You have to ship these goods around, or cart these goods around to get the resources in the right locations. So there's lots of elements here, but the gameplay itself is relatively streamlined. Loads of endgame objectives and scoring you can go for, and this game is an absolute delight to play. So much fun, scales beautifully, I think even up to 6 players, and it's just a phenomenal example of a worker placement game being different. So loving this one. That is Keyflower at number 16. At number 15, another new entry with Brass Birmingham. So Brass Birmingham, one of probably the most iconic economic style games out there, set in the age of industry. This one, you are trying to get as much money as you can. And the idea you're doing that is by building these different buildings, or these different industries onto the map of England, and you are trying to basically link these routes up to either get points and flip these tiles, which will start generating points, But I love the way that the resources are used in this game, particularly if you link things to a market, and it kind of introduces this supply and demand thing to it, where when you build these resource buildings, if you connect it back and there is empty space on, say, the coal market, then it will start filling up and you'll start generating money to when you fill up those spaces. But when people need coal, it'll make it cheaper for them to buy things. And it is about building these routes, connecting all things together, potentially getting in the way of your opponents, even sometimes making your opponents use your resources so you can upgrade your buildings. So everything is kind of impacting on other players. You know, what you do is important, what they do is important, and it is a nice tight map. And it's just a really interesting game that you can't really give justice to in a short little synopsis like this. But you know, needless to say, this is one of the most widely regarded and greatly regarded Euro games and economic games out there. And this year I found out the reason for that. So that was my number 15, Brass Birmingham. At number 14, I have Teotihuacan. This is another Daniele Tascini game that's placed as high as 8 in the past, and last year was number 15, so it's actually climbed one place. This one is another dice-driven Euro, but this time you are not drafting dice, you actually have a rondelle, and you're moving one of these dice around, and then depending on where they end, or when you end your movement, you're going to get a certain action, which it can be getting resources, it can be climbing tracks, it can be placing these tiles onto this big pyramid of these basically dominoes, and try to match symbols and climb tracks as well. Loads of things to do here. I love how careful you have to be and how opportunistic you have to be when things open up on the board, and lining up your dice can be really important because you get more benefits, but it does kind of tunnel vision you somewhat, where you're not as flexible with the actions you can take because all your dice are in one place. Every time you take an action, you have to upgrade your dice, which is great because it makes actions more powerful, but it means when it comes to a feeding phase, you're going to have to spend more resources to feed your workers or potentially suffer a penalty. This game is a bit of a head trip at times, as one thing triggers another, so it does have that cascading domino effect of bonuses, which I really love, but you can lose track of it in this one. Expansions add even more complexity and depth to the game if you choose to do that, but the base game alone is still phenomenal in its own regard. Love this one. So much to explore. It really is just options and options galore, but it's a wonderful game. That is Teotihuacan at number 14. At number 13, I actually have a game that's kept its place. This was actually last year's number 13. This is the Oracle of Delphi. This is another Stefan Feld game. So 3 Stefan Feld games in this section of the list. This one is a pick up and deliver game, which actually has a lot of similarities to the mechanisms used in the Castles of Burgundy, where you're rolling dice and choosing to use those dice as you see fit. But this one, you are basically having symbols on these dice, and you can use them to travel around the map. You can use the colours to pick up different things and pick them up and drop them off somewhere else. You're trying to visit these different locations to slay these kind of mythical creatures. And this is all based on a bunch of objectives you're given at the start of the game. And it's a race to get all these objectives done and get back to the centre and hopefully beat the other players to it. This game has some really cool player benefits you can get as you go along the game, where even if it's not your turn, when certain dice are rolled, you can charge up these god powers, and when they reach a certain point, you can choose to trigger them, which might let you teleport around the board or let you just slay monsters straight up without having to roll the dice, or let you move faster. So there's some really cool things you can do in this game, and it's really satisfying when you choose to trigger these things together and have really powerful turns. I love the efficiency puzzle of what route am I going to go? Am I going to go here and collect this thing and drop it over here? That's probably the optimal route to go, but is somebody going to get in your way and snatch the resource that you were going to take? So you have to zig and zag accordingly. What a game this one is. Certainly the best example of a pick up and deliver game I've ever played. It really is remarkable, and I'm really surprised this game isn't as popular as I think it could be, because it does share so much DNA with Castles of Burgundy, which is of course Feld's most popular game by far. But this one, I've ranked it higher than the Castle of Burgundy because I think it is a better game, and it's amazing. So definitely try this one out if you love your Felds. That is the Oracle of Delphi. At number 12, I have Navegador by Mac Gertz. This was actually last year's number 9, so it's fallen 3 places and fallen out of the top 10. This one is A really interesting rondel game. So you do have this wheel of actions, and you can move, I believe it's 1, 2 or 3 spaces around this rondel, and they'll do things such that you sail around the map and you're basically trying to explore the world, and when you venture into new territory you can lose new ships, but you get bonuses for doing so, and you are investing as you go. And one of these options you can take is to invest in a particular strategy. So it might say, for every exploration you take, you get 1 point, but if you invest again, you get 2 points for each one, and then 3 points if you choose to focus that way. It also has this cool supply and demand market where you are reaching these new settlements, which will let you buy and sell particular goods. But as the game develops, new goods are becoming unlocked, which means that the previous existing goods might, the demand for those might go down or might go up. So it really is a game about trying to manage money in order to invest in different things, investing in these new buildings so you can do more of that, or investing in workers so that you can buy new points options. And of course, investing in new ships, because ships are they're a fluctuating commodity. Sometimes you've got loads of them, all of a sudden you've got none of them. And this game has a really interesting pacing as well, where when you reach a certain thresholds on the map, things become more expensive. So do you want to start doing things early while they're cheap, but potentially leaving it a risk in terms of new land to be discovered by other players? So it does have that cool tension of where you are reliant on the other players and what they're going to do, and it's going to impact on what you're going to do. Love this game. This is an absolute throwback Euro style game. It's a beautiful looking board, all those traditional kind of sepia tones that Eurogamers like me adore, and this one is certainly a game that lives in the shadow of Matt Gertz's most popular game, which we'll probably touch on a bit later, but this game is easily as good. A fractional, well, definitely a hair's width in between the two, and this one, just like some of the other games I've mentioned by massive designers, this game is certainly amongst the best. Love this one. That is Navegador at number 12. And finally, at number 11, I have another Daniele Tascini game. This is Tzolk'in, the Mayan calendar. This is actually placed as high as 3 and as low as 8. So this is the lowest it's ever been on one of my top 50 lists. This was actually, I think, the first more involved Eurogame I ever played when I got into the hobby. I don't think I'd ever played any game like this, and it really did blow my mind about how this game works, how it came together, how well balanced it is. And it really did fascinate me what modern games were capable of. And all these years later, all the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of games that I've played since this one, this is still ranked number 11. So that really does show how great of a design this one is. I suppose on the face of it, this is a traditional worker placement style game, as you're collecting resources, trading them in to get buildings and different upgrades. But this has a massive twist where you're placing these workers on these gears, and every round these gears are rotating and moving further and further up these tracks, which means that the further or the longer you leave them on those tracks, the better rewards you're going to get. But you can't just leave things on those tracks, because you actually are forced to either place one or take one off, or take some off. And if you do that, then you're going to have to trigger them. So you've only got a very limited amount of these workers. You can invest in getting more, but it's all about timing things correctly. So you might think, I'll put this worker here and let it rotate, and by the time it rotates twice, I'll put this one here, and by the time it gets to this spot, this one will be here, and I can take them off together and get a big bonus. And it really adds a new dimension to the worker placement genre that hasn't been replicated. I still think there's loads to explore with this system, but it almost feels like there needs to be a Tzolk'in 2 just to see what else this game can do. But this base game alone is absolutely remarkable design. I mean, just mind-blowing what what Daniele Tascini can do. What an amazing designer he is. He really is a genius. And Tzolk'in is still one of the pioneers demonstrating how clever he is. So an amazing game, probably one of the best worker placement games out there. That is Tzolk'in, the Mayan calendar. So that concludes this installment of my top 50 board games of all time. I really hope you've enjoyed it, and we've just got one installment left with the best of the best of the best with my top 10. So stay tuned for that one. It'll be dropping relatively shortly. If you have enjoyed the video, please hit like and subscribe to my channel, and check out my other videos too. For everyone else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye.